And so once word got back to the United States that Rafsanjani was probably going to get the students to let the hostages go, people from the Reagan campaign got on an airplane and flew to Iran. And they went to Rafsanjani's office, knocked on his door, and the secretary let him in, and they set a couple of suitcases filled with money on his desk, and they said, what would it take for you not to release the hostages? And Rafsanjani is like, wait a minute, what? I thought you were from the United States. Why wouldn't you want the hostages released?
I mean, there's two events. There's one precedes the Iranian-Iraq War, which is obviously during the revolution, the embassy, the American embassy is seized and captured and retained under Iran's control for a very long period of time. And we can talk about that. Talk us through how the embassy capture, right, for lack of a better word, well, what happens there and how does that set Iran down this path of anti-Americanism, America is Shaitan?
During the revolution, or I guess in the aftermath of the initial phase of the revolution, a group of students decide to storm the U.S. Embassy. They're college students. And the reason they want to storm the U.S. Embassy is because they believe that the proof that the United States overthrew their democracy in 1953 will be there. And they want the United States to apologize for it. So the students are heading to the embassy. The government, the fledgling revolutionary government, literally calls the embassy on the phone, and they're like, get out. We have a group of students marching towards you. They're going to capture the embassy. We really don't want this to be an international incident. If you're not there, it's a lot better for everybody. And their attitude is, if we shoot the students or try to stop them, we don't know what happens to the revolution, so we can't. We have to let them do this, but you could just not be there. But the 50 or so guys who are still there, because most of the embassy staff did escape. Some of them, had already left. Some of them escaped to the Canadian embassy. The guys who stayed behind, the reason they stayed behind is they were CIA operatives whose job it was to destroy the documents that were in the embassy that would prove, for example, that they had in fact done a coup d'etat in 1953. But it was way more than that. Tehran had become the center for all CIA operations in Asia. So it was the headquarters for stuff that was going on in China. It was the headquarters for stuff that was going in Southeast Asia, in India. Wherever the CIA was operating in Asia, Tehran was the headquarters. So they had all the documents for everything they had been doing, plus all the locations and names of the spies and where they were operating and what their mission was. So the CIA just couldn't evacuate the embassy. They needed to destroy those documents. So they're literally just sitting there shredding them when the students climb the walls and enter the embassy. For the record, an embassy is the sovereign territory of the state that is represented. So in that moment, it is an international incident, because in that moment, those students have literally entered the United States of America and are, trespassing, but on an embassy which was considered like a semi-sacred thing. Obviously, it's not truly sacred because the United States doesn't believe it's a sacred thing. But anyway, this was an international incident, but it wasn't like they had captured legitimate embassy staff. They had captured the CIA operatives in the embassy. So then when they capture them, they tie them up and they take the documents, the shredded documents, and they just go to nearby middle schools and high schools, and they empty out garbage bags of these documents, and they go, you guys like to make puzzles, right? And those kids sit there and put the shredded documents back together. And once they do, they make copies of them and they distribute them free to anybody who wants them. It's a devastating blow to U.S. CIA operations throughout Asia, because they literally have to call back their operatives. So the United States does have grounds for complaining, but at the same time, the complaint is, oh, you caught us red-handed. And it included all the documents for 1953, where it details out exactly what Kermit Roosevelt did. So, what I'm saying isn't coming from anybody's mouth. It's coming from the CIA's mouth. It's coming from Kermit Roosevelt, because we can read those documents because the Iranians made them public. In any case, those students then asked the United States to do a formal apology. Basically, the attitude the students had was, if you guys say you're sorry for 53, we'll let your CIA operatives go. And Jimmy Carter wanted nothing to do with this. He just, he got some things right, especially as an ex-president. But as president, he felt like if he ate this crow, it would just be devastating to U.S.'s public image. So he just didn't want to apologize. He didn't want to admit that the United States had overthrown the Iranian government in 1953. So he refused, and that's why the Iran hostage crisis dragged on and on and on and on. And one of the things it did is it captured the imagination of the American public. So there are people in the U.S. who were glued to their TV, and every day they would start with a ticker how many days those guys had been held captive. And Nightline, a whole news program was created just around the hostage crisis thing. It evolved into something else over time, but initially it was, basically just a ticker for what's happening with the hostage crisis. I remember, because I was a kid back then, I remember there was a huge amount of anti-Iranian hatred that was being fomented. I was living in Denver, and the Coptic Orthodox Church, Coptic Orthodox religion is the Christian religion in Egypt, got bombed. And the reason was somebody thought that the Coptic Orthodox Church was Iranian, because they obviously went to American public schools and couldn't differentiate between the two. But that was the extent to which you're seeing this anti-Iranian hatred fomenting. Is there were people actually in the United States committing acts of terror against what they perceived to be Iranian targets. And then Rafsanjani, one of the top clerics, one of the most powerful men in Iran, really until he died. Obviously, after the Green Movement in 2009, a lot of his power was eroded because he took the side of the reformers. But he was really powerful and in a really strong position. He went to the students and began negotiating because the Islamic Republic wanted this crisis ended. And it seemed very likely he was going to get a deal. And so once word got back to the United States that Rafsanjani was probably going to get the students to let the hostages go, people from the Reagan campaign got on an airplane and flew to Iran. And they went to Rafsanjani's office, knocked on his door, and his secretary let him in. And they set a couple of suitcases filled with money on his desk, and they said, what would it take for you not to release the hostages? And Rafsanjani is like, wait a minute, what? I thought you were from the United States. Why wouldn't you want the hostages released? And they said, we're from the Reagan campaign. The election hasn't happened yet. If you release the hostages before the election, Carter will get reelected. If you release the hostages after the election, Reagan will win. It's just that simple. What we need you to do is keep those hostages until at least after the first Tuesday of November. We would love it if you kept them right up until Inauguration Day so that Reagan could get credit for freeing the hostages. And Rafsanjani decided, because we don't know exactly the full extent of the deal, it's pretty obvious there was a money transaction, but he decided that this was useful for Iran. And so he actually broke the negotiations with the students off, and the hostages ended up staying hostage for, I think, another 6 months. And then Reagan won. Jimmy Carter didn't know that the Reagan guys had gone. Now, it's worth pointing out, the guys who would have told him that the Reagan guys had gotten on an airplane and flown to Iran probably would have been the CIA, but Reagan's vice presidential candidate was George Bush Sr., who had been the director of the CIA. So it's entirely likely the CIA just simply failed to inform Jimmy Carter of what had transpired. So in Jimmy Carter's mind, he still needed to get the hostages released. He worked on it until noon on January 20th. His last minutes in office was him talking to Iran, trying to convince them to release the hostages. It never occurred to him that he had actually been just completely outmaneuvered. Shortly after the inauguration, that's when the hostages were released. And of course, Reagan went, see, that's what it took. It took me becoming president to get the hostages released.